I'm here today with Lauren Watral, who is a geriatric care manager, discussing Beyond Driving with Dignity. Welcome, Lauren. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you.
So this is a huge issue. Mom's getting older. She's driving very, very slowly. She's maybe gotten into a couple of accidents. But how do we take those car keys away with dignity and respect? What are some of the warning signs of needing to do that?
Well, the warning signs of a person who might have to consider retirement from driving. We like to use the word retirement rather than taking away the keys.
That's a nicer term.
Things like if there are dents in the car, if there are bumps in the car, if the driver is hitting the curb, if the driver's hitting a mailbox, not going into the garage straight, if the driver is getting lost.
Okay.
Those are some of the symptoms of perhaps a driver, an older driver, might be considered to end their driving career.
How do you go about opening up that conversation about retiring from driving?
Well, that's a tough question.
It's a loaded question,
It's
isn't
a
it?
very loaded question. A lot of family members have a lot of difficulty thinking about talking to their parents about cessation of driving, or maybe continuing driving, but with some limitations. And
it's almost putting themselves in a role reversal. Been in a position their whole lives of...
It's very hard for an adult child to become, quote, the parent, and the aging parent driver having to listen to the concerns of the adult child. But it's very difficult to have the conversation because some adult children are afraid, well, if they bring up this conversation, they might be written out of the will.
Wow.
Because there can be some confrontation, and it can be a source of contention, and it can produce a lot of anxiety and tension and stress for family members talking to their aging parent drivers.
I think in some of the support groups that I facilitate in the community, often families will say, it's time for mom not to be driving. I know that, but I can't do anything about it. And it's a very common thing, I think.
Absolutely.
What about a person with a cognitive impairment? I think it gets even more complicated because you may be able to have that open conversation that first time, but they may not remember it. So what are some of the common strategies that a family can use if they do decide, geez, they're getting lost when they're driving, this is a major issue?
Well, there's a program that I'd like to talk about, which is called the Beyond Driving with Dignity program.
Okay.
And Raleigh Geriatric Care Management offers this program, and it's an alternative to the resources that are currently available in the area. It's a very different kind of a program. It's a program that helps the family to have the conversation. It teaches the family how to have a conversation. It's not a driving refresher course. It's not a occupational therapy test. What it is, it helps the family and the older driver to talk about the issues or the concerns that the adult parent, the adult child is having with the driving habits of the older driver. So the program actually helps to preserve dignity, the integrity, and the independence as long as possible for the adult driver, for the older driver.
So can you give some suggestions of some of the things that you teach a family? Especially for a person with a cognitive impairment, I would suspect that that's probably the hardest. I've heard over and over, we've given mom so many reasons why she can't drive. We've turned the battery off in the car's not working. Do you have any other tips?
Well, there's a workbook that is available to help the family to have the conversation. And it actually is a tool an alternative tool that helps the family to reduce opinions of driving to fact.
Okay.
And it's a bunch of paper and pencil exercises and checklists that the adult driver, the aging driver, can actually go through and check off different items that maybe are of concern to them as well as to their adult child. The book actually has a couple of pages in there about how to have the conversation. And actually that was my contribution to the book. And it talks a lot about dignity, preserving their dignity, preserving their integrity.
So could you give me an example of how this program might potentially help someone who is in this type of a situation, a real world example of how this has helped?
Okay, so there was this gentleman who, actually the founder of the program, his name is Matt Gurwell, and he is a retired highway patrolman, and he is the mastermind behind this Beyond Driving with Dignity program. And actually he was with a family who did all the paper and pencil exercises in the program.
Okay.
And the aging driver got into the car with the facilitator of the exercise. And as he was driving, he was bumping into the curb and doing these things and getting lost, even in familiar areas. And the facilitator said to him, "Please pull over to the side of the road, and I'm going to drive us home." And the driver, after doing the paper pencil exercises and doing the checklists in the book, he said, "You know what? I think it's time for me to stop. I see what I did wrong. I turned windshield wipers on that shouldn't have been turned on. I put blinkers on when I shouldn't have put a blinker on. I hit a curb." He says, "You know what? I think my family is right."
So sometimes maybe even taking family out of the picture then might help. Is that part of what the program?
Absolutely, that's right.
So there's a driving test component to this.
Well, it's a driving exercise. We don't
Okay.
call it a test.
Okay.
It's an exercise.
Test is a scary word,
That's
yes.
right. And the adult aging driver actually gets into the car with the facilitator.
Okay.
And the good thing about this program is because they're driving their own car and they're driving on familiar roads, it reduces their anxiety significantly rather than going to an institution or to a doctor's office or to DMV, and where it can be very anxiety provoking. This is a lot less stressful. And the facilitator takes the driver and goes through a checklist of things, looking for
certain signs
and see if their skills are diminished. And the hope is that, and again, this is a tool, the hope is that the aging driver will understand and see, what it does is it's reducing opinion of their children, of how they're driving. It reduces opinion to actual fact.
So say, for example, and I don't know what your protocol is with this, you do notice that the person really shouldn't be on the road. I mean, you're scared to death when you're in the car with them that day. And that person still refuses to give it up and retire. Do you take it to the next step and let DMV know, or how does that work?
Well, it's really not up to me to do that. This is really becomes, the whole Beyond Driving with Dignity program is really a tool, and it's a self-assessment tool.
Okay.
It's not a test.
Okay.
It's really a tool to let the family and the adult driver, it's just information gathering for them. It gives them a tool. And if the driver refuses to give up, well, that's becomes their issue.
And the family's issue.
And the family's issue.
And maybe the doctor's issue.
And yes.
And sometimes the doctor works best.
But the good thing about this program is that after the facilitator does these paper pencil exercises and does the driving exercise, they write up a report.
Okay.
And it's a pretty extensive report based on the entire interview.
Okay.
And they can have that report to take with them, study it, reread it, and actually take it with them to the doctor or a therapist or whoever. And it just gives the family just one more piece of evidence that perhaps this driver should retire.
So is this a program where it's taken to the person's home, or do they have to come to an outside location? How does that work?
What makes this program different from any other is that the facilitator goes to the client's home.
Where they're familiar.
Where they're familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a lot less anxiety provoking.
Mm-hmm.
They sit around the kitchen table, and it's in their home. They don't have to go to an institution or to the doctor's office and use fancy equipment, and all it is papers and pencils.
So that's good.
Mm-hmm.
And the actual driving assessment also is done in their neighborhood where they're familiar as well.
That's right.
So that's an
right.
important piece.
That's
because
exactly
if
right.
they're just somebody who's driving just generally in that neighborhood, taking them to an outside place may automatically make them fail. So
Right, and see, they're in their own car,
Mm-hmm.
they're in their own neighborhood, and they get to choose the route that they want to go on that's familiar to them.
So what types of things would you tell people who are concerned about their loved ones driving, the actual families?
I would tell them that it's important not to sweep the issue under the carpet.
Yeah,
I
it's
would
easy
tell
to do. Look the other way, blind's eye, denial. We all have it, don't we?
get the elephant out of the room
Yeah.
and have the conversation today,
Okay.
now.
Okay. That's important because other people's lives are at risk potentially as well.
That's exactly right.
And that makes for a much worse situation. So is there a fee for this service? How does that work? I know you don't need to talk about specific numbers. Is this a free service to the community or?
There is a fee,
Okay.
and I would suggest that if anybody's interested in the program, to call Raleigh Geriatric Care Management.
Okay, to find out the details. Is there anything else you'd like to add specifically about the program?
I would just like to say that it is a fantastic program, and I'm honored to be a part of it. I am right now, the one certified professional in the Beyond Driving with Dignity program in North Carolina.
Okay.
And I'm very excited to be a part of it, and I like the fact that I'm making a difference in people's lives and helping to save lives.
And what happens though if it is decided and that person comes to the realization, okay, yes, you're right, I really probably shouldn't be driving anymore. What do they do for transportation then? Sometimes that's given up that big piece of independence that maybe was helping them stay home.
Good question. Part of the Beyond Driving with Dignity program is to provide alternatives to driving, which is transportation resources. And so we help the families to identify those transportation resources, whether it be family, whether it be church, synagogue volunteers, whether it be for-profit alternative transportation resources or city service. But that's something we work closely with the family to identify those transportation resources.
So when the decision's made, my time is done, you still assist them then? It's
Definitely.
not just that piece, that piece of the puzzles, you still connect them to that.
That's
so that
right.
they're not just left with, okay, now I decided no.
That's right.
That's very important.
And the good thing is that if the transportation resources that we have provided at first, and if, let's say they're not the ones that are working, we'll help them further. So we don't leave them. We don't just leave them hanging.
And I know that you wanted to discuss a few great resources that were available in the community. Would you like to talk about them now?
Yes, there is the Keeping Us Safe program. There's Raleigh Geriatric Care Management. There is the AAA program.
Okay. What's that, the AAA program?
That's the organization where they can actually take a driving refresher course.
Oh, okay. So if you deem that borderline, maybe you could send someone through there.
That's
okay.
right. That's right. There's also a resource at Duke at an occupational therapy office where they can see an occupational therapist to do driving tests. But again, the Beyond Driving with Dignity program is in addition to these resources, but it is a very different kind of a
assessment of sorts.
And it's a self-assessment. It's the adult driver who is the determining for themselves whether or not they should consider driving cessation or continuation with some modifications.
So it really seems like it puts the control back into that older adult, which is wonderful. I love that. So thank you so much, Lauren, for joining us. We're so glad that you were here today, and I hope you have a fabulous day.